When I was in Brazil, I was thinking a lot about our Awake Ministries family, our AM family, and it gave me strength to know that all of you were praying and thinking over me and our senior pastor and the entire team there. So although my body was in the Amazon, my heart was in Myungil-Dong. And actually, I think my body is still in the Amazon. I'm still in Brazilian time zone. I left it there. I'm still waiting for it to come back to Seoul. But I was always thinking of our Awake Ministries when I was eating deer and eating turtles and rats and getting bit by mosquitoes while fishing for piranhas. We didn't catch any piranhas, but I was always thinking of you. And as I mentioned, we were there in Brazil. We were presenting the newly translated Bible. The Bible had never been translated into the Banawa language before, the indigenous Banawa tribe. So for the first time ever in church history, in their history, in Brazilian history, in Korean history, the first time ever this Bible was presented in their native tongue. Such a momentous occasion. If you think back to when Koreans received the Bible for the first time in Korean, what a momentous occasion that was, that we didn't have to read it in English or Chinese, that it was in Korean. So truly such a special moment. And we also were able to dedicate the first ever church building in that village. And actually I found out it was the first ever 2-story building in their history. It's the only building in the entire village, in the entire region. Well, I say region because there's nothing else there. It's the jungle. But the only building there that has 2 floors. And they were just so amazed to see that a building could be 2 stories high, right? So we were able to dedicate that church there. And it was such a blessing to be able to take part in this experience, to be able to take part in this moment in God's history. Not in our history, but in God's history. And all of this was possible because of decades of work. Not just from our church, but also Wycliffe Bible translators who went in there when there was literally nothing else. And they carved out this tiny airfield into the jungle, in the middle of the jungle. If they hadn't done that, this would have been possible. And even this airfield that they cut out of the jungle, it's only big enough for a single engine airplane. A single engine airplane. Most of you have probably never been on a single engine. That means there's one engine. If that engine turns off, there's no other engines. They're going down, right? I saw the plane and I said, oh, is this what we're riding? You know, me and Tamil Moksan were like, we're taking this plane? It looks like a 장난감, right? It looked like a toy plane. And it's so small that we had to weigh every person and every piece of luggage. And not only weigh all the luggage, but we had to distribute it evenly so that, you know, the weight of the plane, if you put something too heavy in the front, the plane will actually go down, right? That's how small this plane is. And so we had to weigh every single person. Some of you may have heard our senior pastor tell this story of someone who had their backpack and was weighed with their backpack and weighed 104 kilograms. 104 kilo. I've been hearing it a lot, so I'm the 104 kilo 목사님. But what he didn't mention was that on our way out, when we were leaving, we got on this plane again, and again we had to weigh everything before we got on this plane to leave. And I weighed myself again with the same backpack, and I weighed 96 kilos. So if you want to get a good diet program, you can just go to the jungle. You just lose the weight immediately. And of course, the bag maybe was a little lighter. My backpack was a little lighter, but most of that weight was just lost through sweat. It was just through sweat. To give you an idea of what it was like, we left to get on the plane on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. So Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. we got on this plane, and before we got on, I decided, I'm going to go to the bathroom one last time. And so I went to the bathroom, got on the plane, and then I didn't go to the bathroom again until 4 p.m. on Thursday evening, right? So from Wednesday morning to Thursday evening for 36 hours, I didn't go to the bathroom. Not because it was dirty or I didn't want to go, but because I literally did not have to go to the bathroom, even though I was drinking water nonstop. It was all just coming out through sweat. And you may also have heard that one of the pastors on the trip was eaten alive by mosquitoes. That was also me. That was also me. Most of the stories that Tami Muksa님 were telling about a certain Muksa님 they were about me. But I like to think that I acted as a human mosquito net, 모기장, for our pastor, right? Mosquito shield, 모기 shield. And when I came back to Korea, a lot of people asked me, they said, wow, it must have been really hard. It must have been really tough. You must have suffered a lot. 고생 많이 하셨죠. But I always answered them, you know what? I didn't suffer. It wasn't suffering. It was not suffering. I'm thankful that God gave me the chance, the opportunity to be a part of this moment. I am thankful. I did not go and suffer. Not because it wasn't hard. It was very hard. And if you look at it objectively, I did suffer a little bit. But I did not count it. I did not count it as suffering. I did not consider it to be suffering. Because when I look at all that I've gained, when I look at the great work that God is doing in that place, through us, the grace that He gave us to do that work, that suffering is really not suffering at all. And that's the attitude that Paul had when he wrote to the Corinthian community, when he said, therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And you know, when Paul said this, Paul was no stranger to difficulty. It's not like Paul did not know about suffering. Paul knew quite a lot about suffering. He did not say that his troubles were light and momentary because they were few, because they were simple. In fact, if you look later in this book in 2 Corinthians, in chapter 11, Paul lists all of his sufferings one by one. He said that he had been thrown into prison, that he had been beaten, that he had been left for dead, that he had been whipped 5 separate times, that 3 times he was beaten with rods, 1 time he was stoned in the head and left for dead. 3 times he was shipwrecked. He had spent an entire night and day adrift in the open sea. He said, I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I think Paul was in danger. I have labored and toiled and have gone often without sleep. I have known hunger and I have known thirst and have gone often without food. I have been cold and I have been naked. Paul was no stranger to trouble. He knew quite a lot about suffering and difficulty. And his troubles were far from light and momentary. He was a man who suffered a great deal. If you viewed it by any human standard, Paul had suffered a lot. But Paul did not see things from a human perspective. He saw things from a holy perspective. And this holy perspective saw the bigger picture, that these light and momentary troubles were achieving something far greater, an eternal glory, something that outweighed any suffering he could endure on this earth. That is why he could say, we are hard-pressed on every side, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. Because we have these treasures in jars of clay. And what did Paul mean by jars of clay? Jars of clay. There was a very famous Christian band back in the day called Jars of Clay. The treasure is God's grace and love, as Paul explains. What Paul describes as the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. He lines it out for us in verse 6. But this priceless treasure, Paul says, is placed in jars of clay. A container that is completely inadequate, inappropriate for the treasure that it held. This container did not match the content. And we don't think a lot about containers. We don't think that they're very important. I remember one of our members telling me after they went to the missions trip to Cambodia, that he saw lock and lock containers being sold in Cambodia. We all know lock and lock, right? That he saw lock and lock containers being sold in Cambodia, but it was being sold in the department store as a very expensive, very prestigious brand. And recently when I went to the Amazon, some of our members took lock and lock water bottles with them, and in the jungle it looked like such a luxurious, like a masterpiece of a container, right? This lock and lock, like the advanced technology. But here in Korea, we consider lock and lock to be like nothing, right? It's nothing. It's very basic, very unremarkable. We would never look twice at a lock and lock container. But a jar of clay was not even on the level of lock and lock, right? That's what we have to realize. A jar of clay was almost next to garbage. It wasn't even on that level. Clay jars during that time, they were made by mixing mud and water and shaping them and then baking them. So it was the lowest kind of container that you could possibly have. The lowest kind of container. It didn't have the longevity or the durability of a bronze jar. If you had a bronze jar, it would last a very long time. If you had a gold jar, the golden jar would have a lot of value. It would have a prestige that you have a golden jar in your home. Or what if you had a glass jar? The delicate beauty of a glass jar. But a jar of clay did not have any of those things. It did not have longevity. It did not have durability. It did not have any value. It did not have any beauty. It had none of these things. On any metric that you could think of, it was worthless. They broke easily. They were worthless. They didn't last. They weren't pretty. They weren't valuable. There was nothing remarkable about a jar of clay. It was a 0 out of 10. And in case you didn't realize, in this story, we are the jars of clay. We are those jars of clay, not someone else, not our neighbor, not that guy at work, but we are the jars of clay. But the people of Corinth that Paul was writing to, the Corinthian people, they thought that they were very precious. They didn't want to hear this nonsense that they were jars of clay. Oh my goodness, a jar of clay? Does anyone use that? A jar of clay? Never. They thought that they were made of gold, that they were made of silver, that they would be studded with precious gems and jewels, adorned with the finest designs. In their pride, they refused to see themselves as jars of clay, but they thought that they were the treasure themselves. Notice the difference there. They didn't think of themselves as containers. They thought that they were the treasure themselves. Even if there were containers, they definitely didn't think of themselves as lock and lock. Never. Lock and lock? Me? No. I'm Le Creuset, right? A fancy brand. 명품. Name brand. But Paul is telling them, you are a jar of clay. He wasn't saying it to put them down, because he's saying, I'm a jar of clay too. That's all that we are in the eyes of God. We are just jars of clay. We are humble with nothing of worth to bring. We are worth nothing. It is only what God puts inside us that gives us worth. Humble yourselves, Paul is saying. Humble yourselves and see what you truly are. They were just containers. They thought that they were the content. They thought that they were the treasure, but Paul says we are just containers. We are just vessels. We only hold this treasure. We are not the treasure itself. Many of you may know Bruce Lee, the famous Kung Fu movie star. He was a huge celebrity in the US. He's still idolized there to this day. And there's a very famous saying of his that I see quoted everywhere. It's very philosophical. And it says, if you put water in a cup, it becomes a cup. If you put water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend. When I was young, I heard this. I was like, oh, this is pretty 멋있어, right? This is pretty cool, right? I could get with that. Be water, my friend. Be water. We hear this and we think, oh, that's nice. I can be water. That sounds appealing to me. I can be water. I can bend and I can flex and I can form myself to whatever container I'm put into, whatever I'm put in. And so we're poured from this to that, here and there and everywhere. And we think, I can be like water. We fill whatever shape we are put into, and in the end, we have no actual form, no true form for ourselves. We have no shape. We have no definition. We just become water, flowing here and there and everywhere. But what does the Bible tell us? What does the Bible tell us? It says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It tells us that we are not the content. We are not the water that needs to fill a space, that needs to fill a container. But it says we are the container. We are supposed to be filled. That is our calling. We are these jars of clay with no worth in ourselves. The only value we have is through the treasure that God has placed within us. So should we listen to the Bible or should we listen to Bruce? I think we should listen to the Bible. It tells us, do not lose heart. Do not lose heart, because outwardly we are wasting away, but inwardly we are being renewed day by day. It is what is inside us that counts. What is it that gave Paul strength through all of his trials, through all of his tribulations, all the things that he went through? What is it that gave him strength? Was it some outstanding talent that he had, some skill that he was born with, some innate ability? Did he have a superhuman endurance, a tolerance for pain? He didn't have any of these things. He was not born with anything special. No, it was what God put inside him that gave him strength. This treasure of God's light inside Paul gave him the strength that he needed to proceed, the strength that he needed to believe. If we have any hope of facing the trouble of our own lives, it will not be by filling ourselves with more of ourselves. We cannot fill ourselves with more of ourselves. We cannot find strength from our own strength. It's not possible. We cannot be the content. We can only be the container. The content, the treasure, is what God gives us, what God puts inside us. On my way back to Seoul from Brazil, I had to take a 14-and-a-half-hour flight to Dubai, from Sao Paulo to Dubai, 14-and-a-half hours, and then from there another 9-and-a-half-hour flight to Incheon Airport. After a 14-and-a-half-hour flight, the 9-and-a-half-hour flight seems very short. I was like, oh, it's over already. We're already in Incheon. And in the middle, I spent 6 hours in Dubai. And everyone's like, oh, you got to go see Dubai? I just stayed at the airport, right? I didn't get to leave the airport, which was unfortunate because I really wanted to, I've always wanted to see the Burj Khalifa Tower, right? Dubai Tower, something I've always wanted to see. But unfortunately, I did not get to go. Maybe next time. But at least I can say I've seen Jamshir Tower, right? And I've seen the Freedom Tower in New York City, so I'm satisfied with that. But, it's truly a remarkable feat of human engineering, human ingenuity, that this tower can stand. And I looked and I saw that this tower, it can withstand hurricane force winds, up to 200 kilometers an hour wind, can blow all around this tower, and it won't be affected at all. It can even withstand a 7.0 magnitude earthquake. Even that will not shake this tower. How is it that this is possible? How can we build such a thing that can last, that can withstand such forces? And to get the answer, we have to go back to the mid-1800s, when a simple gardener named Joseph Monnier, he was living in the south of France, and he had a big problem. Joseph Monnier was a gardener, and all of his pots kept breaking. His flower pots kept breaking. And these pots were made out of clay. And as we discussed today, clay is just completely worthless. And these pots kept breaking, so he decided that he was going to use concrete, that he was going to make a concrete flower pot. And so these concrete flower pots lasted a little bit longer, but even they kept on breaking and cracking. So one day he decided that he was going to experiment, and he put little metal rods in a grid pattern and made a mesh. And in that mesh, he made the shape of a flower pot and then covered it with concrete, right? So he made like a skeleton inside that flower pot. And this made the concrete that much stronger. These flower pots suddenly could last, and he realized that actually, that he stumbled onto something big, that this was more than just flower pots, and so he went and he patented his invention immediately. And that's how reinforced concrete was born. This building that we're standing in today is possible because of reinforced concrete, metal rods placed inside the concrete. Everything that we see today, everything that we take for granted is possible because of this invention. From the longest bridges to the tallest towers, Jamshir Tower, Burj Khalifa Tower, all the way to a 2-story church in the middle of the jungle is built the same way, with this reinforced concrete. Because concrete is very strong on its own. I'm sure we all know that. Concrete is very, very strong on its own, but it cannot stand up. It cannot stand up. Once you place real pressure and real force on concrete, it begins to crack and it begins to crumble, no matter how strong it is. And we might think that we are strong. We might think that we have a little bit of strength, that we have a little bit of ability in ourselves, and it's true. On our own, we can stand up to some of the weight of this world. We can stand up to a lot of things. But once we face a real challenge, our own strength quickly becomes insufficient. Our strength is not enough to stand on its own. And it is at those times that what is inside us will make the difference. What is inside us will make the difference. Not what we have within ourselves, by ourselves, but what God has put within us.
Amen.
Concrete on its own it breaks apart, it crumbles, it fails. But concrete with steel inside can withstand tremendous force, tremendous pressure, and it can even bend without breaking. So therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day by this treasure that God has placed within us. We have these treasures in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and is not from us. It is not ours. We are not the content. We are just the containers. So we are hard-pressed on every side, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. If any of us here today are facing problems, is anyone here facing a problem? If we are facing problems that threaten to break us under their force, under their pressure, if we cannot withstand these things on our own, we are in luck. Because Paul is talking to us about this truth that we are not the content. We are just containers. We are containers for this treasure that God places within us, the light that God has placed within us. And that is what gives us strength. When we rely on ourselves, we might make it a day, we might make it a month, or even a year or two. But our strength will fail. Our endurance will falter. We have to look beyond just months and years. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, not on what we can touch and feel and perceive in front of us, but on what is unseen, what God gives to us. Because what is seen is temporary, it is fleeting. But what is unseen is eternal, is of God. So let us fix our eyes on what is unseen. Let us fix our eyes on what is eternal. Let us look beyond the light and momentary troubles of this world to the glory that far outweighs them all. Let us pray together.